Hi, thanks for watching. This is Andy Norton, and this is my Astral class guide for Frosthaven. So, a few things to begin with. I am not a huge expert. I'm not mandatory quest or something like that. This is more of an introduction to this class, but I really loved this unlockable class in Frosthaven, and I thought it was rather complex just to get over the first hurdle, but very fun once you did that. And so I wanted to just give some tips and an introduction so that you can just hit the ground running once you do unlock this class. So, and with that, again, as you can see on the screen, heavy spoilers. I'm going to reveal everything about this class, the Astral class, or as some might call it, the Star Moon or Moon and Star class. But so in just a few moments here, I'm going to show you all the cards. I'm going to show you the player mat, etc., and give you an introduction to them. So without further ado, spoilers are ahead. Here we go. So this is the Orchid Infuser. I'll just read the introduction here. Orchids come from across the misty sea and can spend years in a peaceful state, contemplating and planning their next move, while crystals grow across their skin. Orchids are largely unaffected by their environment, getting whatever warmth and sustenance they need from their meditations. So it is perfectly natural they would eventually find their way into the inhospitable north. These harsher climates provide them with new, unique perspectives on which to ruminate. An orchid's contemplative nature also gives them a particular prowess over the elemental energies of the world. Some use these energies to attack their foes with raw power. However, others emit these energies into strands of elemental fabric, weaving them into physical armor and weapons. These are the infusers, martial warriors who use the natural flow of elements to enhance their already formidable fighting skills. So a few things that you can quickly get from there is that they are, all about contemplation and meditation. They've done all of this thinking and ruminating before they've hit the battlefield. And I really like that because also that you feel that mechanically as a player. You really do, I think, have to meditate just on their cards and really think about how you're going to go about this before you even hit the battlefield. And so I would encourage you to do the same. Take some time to contemplate these cards slowly and carefully before you venture north. And also, as you can see there, they're all about physical weapons and armor, and they're martial warriors, and they're all about elements. So they're very martial. They can do some serious melee damage. If you look down there, they are heavy on the melee and only barely have any ranged capacity. They're pretty high on mobility and defense, and then they're pretty middling on support and control. And I think that's pretty accurate to everything that they have going on. They also have those elemental affinities of wind, earth, and night. And unlike some characters who the elemental affinities are somewhat, they're not really on display, they are front and center for this character. You are going to be dealing with all three of those elements, and almost always you're going to be needing two of them ready to go for you to actually pull off your biggest things. So that's who this is. And that's where actually a lot of the thinking is gonna come in. You're gonna see in a moment that a card's gonna require, say, wind and any other element, or it's gonna require specifically earth and night. So to set that up, typically that means that the top and bottom row action, the turn before, needed to have been spent creating those elements so that you can then the next turn go ahead and do that double use of elements to get something huge. So moving on to the next slide here. So on the front of their player board here, it says you have powerful actions known as infusions. This is what they're all about, which typically require the consumption of multiple elements to perform. They have both a persistent bonus and an ability which you may perform anytime each infusion action is performed, potentially yielding a chain reaction when you have multiple infusions active infusions. These extra abilities can be performed in any order when triggered. So the infusion example they have there is Boon of the Tempest. So to play it, it's going to require that you consume both wind and any other element. And then you're going to have a persistent bonus. So for the rest of the game, you're going to have +1 movement and jump to all of your move abilities, which is really actually fantastic. They are not very mobile until you play this card. And this has actually become one of my favorite early cards to play for them, just to get them mobile. But so it requires wind and another element to play, which is asking quite a bit. And you have now that persistent ability for the rest of the game. But you also then can immediately, when this infusion is played, perform attack 3. So pretty cool that you are getting a persistent bonus, but you're also going to immediately get to do something practical right then and attack. Now, later on, you might do another infusion card. And just to be clear, you might only do maybe 2 infusions over the course of the game, maybe 3. As I'm seeing with the first, at least with your level 1 cards, it's pretty common for me to do 2 infusions by the mid game, but not necessarily more than that. And so, but the next time you played an infusion, you'd get that other persistent bonus. And then you get to do this ability of attack 3, and then whatever the other ability is in whatever order you'd like to. So another card has an ability of strengthen. And so you often would strengthen and then do this attack 3 with advantage. So that's how the infusions work. Now it says many of your abilities allow you to reduce their power in exchange for infusing elements. These exchanges are optional. Any action with mandatory element consumptions can only be performed if the elements are consumed. So that's a great example right there of, it says move 4, you can reduce the movement by 1 to create wind. And so it's an optional power reduction. That's very, very common. You'll see across their cards. However, I would say there's still, even for how common that is, there's still quite a few limitations as far as how you can create some of these elements. And so I found I had to really, really think about what order you might want to do these in order to create elements without necessarily losing cards. Because there are some lost cards that more easily create elements. But I had to really look and see, okay, which cards actually aren't lost effects and can reliably create these elements to set up for another turn. So that's that. And it says they are arcane, educated, and strong. And they have a pretty middling HP of 8 to begin with, but a pretty high card number of 11, which is really, really nice when you have a character who you know is going to want to get, at least one of these infusions out typically. I've found that, again, I'll usually get 2 of the infusions out by the mid game, often one of them in the first go, before the first rest, and not necessarily more than that. And I found I don't necessarily need to do many other lost cards, so they feel pretty card heavy in many ways. If you play them correctly, if you know how to create these elements without using lost cards, which was, I think, the big hurdle I had to begin with. All right, let's go ahead and look at their first cards. The first card here is that card, Boon of the Tempest, and it's going to be 28 initiative, so pretty fast. And it says infusion requires wind and another element to play the top action. And that's going to give you that persistent bonus of add +1 movement and jump to all your move abilities. And then when you play this infusion or another infusion is played, perform attack 3. It's going to be a lost card. It's going to be staying on the board. I think it's called persistent. And then you get 2 cheap XP right there. On the bottom row, it says move 4 and reduce that by 1 to create wind. So this is a very interesting card. I really, really like the top action. This infusion is just a great infusion for them. I wasn't able to pull it off for the first while when I was playing them, and I just got frustrated by not having much good movement with them. But once you have this, having an extra +1, and they can always jump is really, really, really great. And then just getting that that solid attack off when you play this, and then later on getting another attack is good. Those attacks are really can be really solid, but just getting set up with the movement when you're at least when you're playing a scenario that does require you to be pretty agile, this is a card that you might want to get on the board by, say, your second turn, which I'll show you how you can do that. Unfortunately, one of the easiest ways to create wind is on the bottom of this card. You can just reduce that movement down to a healthy 3 movement to create wind, but that's not going to normally let you then play this card because you just used it to create that element. The exception to this might be if you were playing this on your 5th turn, and so you could use the bottom row to create wind, and then you're taking a short rest and you've got wind created, and so then you could use the wind to play this on the next after your first rest, which is pretty legitimate. So if you wanted to do that, that is one way you could get the wind for this infusion. But I'll show you a more reliable way here in a moment. So let's move on to the next card for now. This is Bounty of the Earth. So on the top row here, it's 23 initiative, so even better. On the top row, it's a solid 2 shield, stays out there for the turn. You can reduce that just to simply 1 shield to create Earth and gain an XP. This is one of the best ways. I'll kind of demonstrate this more mathematically later, but this is one of the easiest ways to create Earth for your infusions. There's another infusion. Well, the infusion beforehand could use Earth as its other element, and there's a attack card that also requires Earth, and this is one of the easiest ways to get it. The nice thing about shield is you can do that even when an enemy is nowhere nearby. Some of the other cards that create elements are connected to attacks or other abilities that target enemies, and if you don't have an enemy to target, then you can't create the element. And so in this case, this is really nice. This is actually what I would suggest as one of your first cards you play. If you play this on your first turn, then on the second turn you'll have Earth to use as the wild element there to be consumed, and also then you're shielded up in case to deal with any initial attacks from enemies. Just 1 shield, but it's nice to have that 1 shield. On the bottom row, it says infusion requires Earth and another element. So you can kind of see a theme here where the easiest way to get that element is on the other side of the card, but that's the element that's wanted by the bottom of the card, so it makes it a little bit challenging. This one says you gain persistent bonus of retaliate 1 within range 2, and when this infusion or another infusion is played, perform heal 3 self. And again, it has the 2 XP, and it's a lost card. This card, clearly, since it's healing you, isn't likely that you'd want to play this super early. And again, this is a really easy way to get Earth on the top row. So I would suggest against planning to use this card early, but you could absolutely use this as another infusion later in the game if it's possible. By infusing this, once you've got the other infusion down, you could then trigger this attack 3 when you play the bottom row of this card as an infusion, and so it'd be a way to just boost your health a little bit and get an extra attack, and now you have retaliate for the rest of the scenario. So I found it can be a legitimate use of it midway through, but typically you're going to want it for the top row action to get that Earth. And like I said, I would hold on to Bounty of the Earth as like the first card you're playing on your first turn. Let's move on to Caress of the Night. So this is another infusion. I think this might be the last of the level 1 infusions, but this infusion requires night. So you've seen the first required wind, next required earth, this requires night, and another element. And it's going to add wound and muddle to all your melee attacks. And then when this infusion or another infusion is played, perform strength and self. This is a phenomenal infusion. Like once this is out, you really feel powerful. You are muddling people so that they're not able to attack you very well or attack your friends. You're adding wound, so it's an easy way to maybe didn't quite finish off an enemy, but you got them down to 1 health left, and that wound is going to drag them down if they just have 1 or 2 health left. And the strengthen is great. Strengthen is an ability that obviously, even if you just used it once, is quite powerful. But if you could, play this first, or play this as maybe your second infusion, and then that other infusion as a third infusion, you'll get the strengthen maybe once or twice in the game, and that's not going to be anything to sniff at. And so that's a really, really solid infusion, but I still would recommend the movement infusion first in most instances, at least in a scenario where you expect to require that agility. If you want to go straight into attacking, this might be what you want to do instead. Now, in the bottom row, it says attack 3. You can reduce that by 1 to create Night and gain an XP. Now, like I said before, this might be something you really don't use the bottom row action of, because you really want to get out the top row. And so you can kind of almost write off that bottom row. I love having a bottom row attack, and it's a pretty easy way to get Night as long as there's a target around. But I honestly have found trying to get this out as my second infusion in my before the first rest has been pretty helpful. And so I have focused on using the top row of this, but you could consider the bottom row. You might end up using the bottom row if you don't play this before your first rest. Let's move on to the next one. This is Formless Blade Storm. So this one on the top row is going to be a lost card that gets you an XP. It says attack 3 with 2 piercing, and it's going to attack 3 enemies in a row, kind of all stacked up in a straight line. And then it says teleport to any unoccupied hex adjacent to the furthest enemy targeted by the attack ability. And then you can create wind or dark. So this is an easy way to create wind or dark if there's an enemy around. And that could be a very, very powerful attack especially if there's, one or more, or 2 or more enemies in those hexes. But it's a lost card. So typically I say avoid this card. Find the harder way, the more difficult way to get your elements created, and then use this later on when you think you can actually get maybe 2 or 3 different attacks. Maybe use this in the turn after you've been strengthened by that infusion, so you can attack 2 or 3 different targets with it. And so that's what I would suggest. Instead, use the bottom row action of this, because this is quite a good use of it, and can be one of the easiest ways to get wind. This is probably how you're going to get wind for that first card. So just going back up to the top where we had that first card. I've gone too far. Sorry, too far. Boon of the Tempest. We said on the bottom row, obviously that's an extremely easy way to get wind, the movement, and just reduce it to get wind. You need wind for the infusion, but you're not normally going to be able to use the bottom row to get the wind for the top row. And so to get that wind, what I would do, you need wind in another element. For your first turn, I would suggest playing Bounty of the Earth to shield up and get the earth for that other element. And then play Formless Blade Storm to move towards an enemy. And then it says push 2 at range 3. You can reduce the push by 1 and reduce the range by 1 to create wind. So as long as there's a monster within 4 spaces of you when you begin the scenario, which is pretty common. Not every scenario, obviously, but many scenarios will have a monster within 4. You could play these 2 cards. You could move 2 spaces, and then if there's a monster within 2 of you, you could push them away, create wind, and then you shield up, create earth. And so then that monster might not even get over to you if they're a slow monster, slow moving. But if they get to you, you're going to be shielded up to deal with that attack. And now you've got wind, and you've got another element. You've got earth. So now you can do in your second turn that infusion. So that's my game plan so far. I think this is one of the easiest ways to get the elements you need, because otherwise there's not an easy, not lost way to get wind to be able to do that infusion early. Now, say you're not within 4 of an enemy to begin the scenario. Maybe hold on to these 2 cards of Formless Blade Storm and Bounty of the Earth. Bounty of the Earth. Hold on to those 2 for maybe a turn, do something else, and then do those two, and now you've done you got the 2 elements that you need for the next turn to infuse the Boon of the Tempest. And that would give you an attack, and then from now on you are going to be able to move and jump around and all that. All right, so that's kind of my first game plan, is to do those cards. And so looking at Formless Bladestorm, again, you're going to be thinking, I'm going to use this for the bottom row typically, so I can move around, push people into traps, and typically creating wind. Moving on to the next card, Emerald Edge. I really like this card. This card on the top row, it's not an infusion, but it does require 2 elements. So these are mandatory consumption. It says consume earth and consume night. So it's a mandatory 2 very specific elements, but the reward is huge. You're gonna have an attack 5, and then ward self, and then 1 XP. And 70 initiative, so very slow, but attack 5, which if you're strengthened, you are looking at quite possibly hitting a 2x if you could, and getting 10 damage from a level 1 card, which is really fantastic. So what I like to do with this is don't plan to play it necessarily in the first go round, like before the first rest. I would typically be thinking, let me get my infusions set up, and get my first infusion with the movement, and then maybe get the second infusion set up, and then if I can either, in the future, I could play this, and it's gonna be an attack 5 with probably wound and muddle, and maybe you can trigger it in some way where you would also be strengthened. But yeah, attack 5 is really great with or without advantage. Although with that, I would suggest the Spyglass, which during your attack ability gain advantage on 1 attack, is a great item to use with this to make sure that you don't miss on this and to increase your chances of maybe doubling it. So I love the top row of this as an attack, but the bottom row is really cool too. It says heal 2 targets at range 2, and you can reduce that to just 1 target to create earth. So this is actually quite an easy way to create earth as well, although you do have to have a damaged target. So you have to be thinking, this might not be something I can do on my first turn or 2, because we probably won't be damaged. But middle of the game, someone's going to be damaged. Typically you're going to have a few hit point damage at least. And so the bottom row is great. And a lot of times I'll be playing this card with maybe hoping I can get the earth created. But if I have to move, then I'll use it just to move to then pull off some sort of top row action. All right, so that's Emerald Edge. Moving on to Torrential Cleave. I really like this card too. This is 83, so extremely slow. The top row is similarly requires 2 specific elements. It requires wind and earth. So before it was earth and night for that big attack. This is wind and earth for this 2 target attack. So we attack 4 with push 2 like targets who are adjacent to you and adjacent to each other, and then you gain 1 XP. So this is a great card. A little hard to early on pull off the top row. I like to get those 2 infused. Obviously, you could do that later on with the same thing that you were using to set up the first infusion. You could do the card that moves you and then pushes and creates wind. You could use the top row for the shielding, create earth, and then the next turn you could use this. That could be a great one, especially since you're kind of just moving around shielding. It's quite possible that then 2 enemies are coming up at you and are going to be banging at your door. So in the next turn you could use this to clobber them. So that could be pulled off later on, but probably before the first short rest, you're using those cards to get that infusion set up. But on the bottom row, this is a really great ability here. It says move 3, reduce set by 1 to create earth. And then on the below that, you can then immobilize 2 targets that are adjacent to you and adjacent to each other. And so this is a really reliable and easy way to get earth. And so typically after you've gotten your first infusion done, which required wind and something else, if you're trying to get the second infusion, the one that strengthens, that requires night and something else. This is probably going to be that other element. So you could just use this to move just a couple, move 2. Actually, if you have the first infusion down, this is still going to be a move 3 with jump, which is fantastic. Even if you reduce it from 4 down to 3, you'll have the +1 and it'll have jump. So move 3 with jump to then create earth, and then the immobilize, which I haven't figured out yet the best uses of that immobilization. I guess what you could do is you could go slow with this, move up to someone, immobilize them, then the next turn you could move away early. But that's, I guess, what you maybe be looking at. I haven't typically used the immobilization too much yet, but it's just an easy way to create earth so you have that extra element for the next infusion, which requires night and something else. So this is sort of the next stage. You've gotten the first stage of those 2 cards to set up the first infusion, and then on maybe the 3rd or 4th turn, you're using this as part of a as part of a turn to set up the next infusion. Which, let's see if the next card is yes, this is the next card, which is likely how you would get the night element. This is Onyx Shards. It's very fast. It's 20. So it's quite possible you'd be playing this and this card, so Torrential Cleave and Onyx Shards. But depending on which one you want to do, if you want to go slow, use the 83. If you want to go fast, use the 20. And it says disarm at range 4. And obviously disarm is amazing. If there's monsters who are not immune to disarm is incredible. People always talk about how effects like disarm can really scale really well as you go up in levels, because you're stopping an entire monster attack whichever way you cut it. And so it's a great ability, disarm at range 4, which is super far. But you can reduce that to just range 2 to create darkness or night. And so again, you might want to just go fast, and before they activate, disarm them, and then maybe even immobilize them too with that other with Torrential Cleave. And now you've set up night and another element to then set up that second infusion. I'm just going to scroll back up to that infusion, which was Caress of the Night, which required night and another infusion, which will then now add wound and muddle to all your melee attacks, and it's going to strengthen you, all of that sort of thing. So that would allow you to get Caress of the Night out on, maybe your 4th or 5th turn. So that's how you'll probably use Onyx Shards. Now, the bottom of Onyx Shards is a lost ability, and the top row is so powerful and such a reliable way to get darkness that really you should typically be saving this for the top row. And also, it's very fast. It's one of her fastest cards at 20, and so you're probably going to want to keep this for the initiative, keep it for that powerful top row action of disarming, keep it for the ability to easily get the element of night. But on the bottom row, this is very, very fun. And so I love this last card. It says create 4 1-hex obstacles in empty hexes within range 3. All enemies adjacent to at least 2 of the created obstacles suffer 2 damage, which could be a lot of enemies, potentially, or it might just be 1 or none. And then you get to create either earth or night, and you get 1 XP. So this, I have used this. There was a scenario where we needed to defend something, and there was just a large space with 2 different kind of spawn points where monsters were coming out of, and I was just playing with 2 characters, so it's very difficult to manage all that space. But what I did is actually just very early on, I just threw up this Onyx Shards kind of diamond obstacles, pulled them up out of the ground, and then it really funneled them around. They had to really travel around for a while to get to me, and then they were kind of funneled through this tight space where I could chop them up and hold them off. And so that was a really, really fun use of it. I found other great uses of it, and it could be just a throwaway great thing in the mid to late game when you want to just close it out. play this, you might get some more damage. You might throw off your, the monster movement and kind of create some space. You'll create an element, which could be set up for a really great attack like the Emerald Edge, which requires both earth and night. And so that's I again probably keep the top row is what you'll mostly be using it for, but it's such a fun bottom row action that you'll have fun with this sometimes doing that. All right, the next one is Unstoppable Impulse. This is an attack 4, which is really, that's great. I don't know that every character necessarily has an attack 4 in their first set of cards. So I really, really like that attack 4. And it's helpful because we don't have access to a lot of piercing. And so this is a good card when you're trying to, overcome a monster's shields. You can do this attack 4. But if you want to bring it down to just a very normal attack 3, that will create darkness or night. So that's a very, very solid attack that you'll sometimes use when you really need to pull off night. But really, there are probably better ways to get night, with the disarm, and really, a lot of times you want to get the full force of that attack, and so you'll probably keep the 4 attack. But occasionally, when you need the night, you can use it for that. It's a very middling initiative of 56, and on the bottom row, this is yet another one of these mandatory consumption of elements. It's wind and night this time. I think the other two were earth and night and earth and wind. This is wind and night. And it says push 2 within range 1, and then move 2, and then push 2 again within range 1, and then move 2, and then create or gain 1 XP. I've rarely used this because very rarely are you just really having those elements available to you, and this is what is really best for you to use. But occasionally those elements are available, and you can really do a lot of pushing around and moving around with this card. So I have used the bottom row, but just oftentimes the top row is such a good card for the attack and maybe for creating some elements. That I've rarely used the bottom row. Where I have used it is actually sometimes it's a great way to get rid of wind when maybe there's a character like a wind demon who is about to do something nasty with that wind element. You could actually just be like, I'm going to change up my turn, consume these elements so that the monsters don't have access to them. So I found that you can stay a little bit, if you stay a little bit loose, sometimes that might actually be the best use of your cards. You might actually flip what you're doing and do things that consume elements that would otherwise be doing something really terrible to you. So that's sometimes when I've used the bottom row of this. Slashing Cyclone. This is an interesting card. It is actually extremely fast. 14. I forgot she has a couple very fast cards actually. So she has 14 initiative on this one. Attack 2, target all adjacent enemies. And you can reduce it attack to 1 to create wind and gain an XP. Obviously, if you have a bunch of enemies around you, attacking 2, all of them could be really powerful. Reducing that attack to 1, it makes it really weird because obviously if there's a lot of enemies, then you're reducing the attack of all those attacks. And if it's just against one enemy, you still reduce it to just 1, which is so measly. So rarely would I use this to create the wind unless I absolutely needed it. And so really, I'm looking at this card mostly as a card that you'd want to use if you're facing a bunch of enemies. And so this is, I would say, I would probably tech a scenario with this card. This is like, I think the first card that I would replace typically, or maybe the second card that I would replace once she starts to level up, and then only bring it back in if I really, really need the early initiative, or if I really need to, expect to deal with a bunch of maybe low health monsters who I need to attack multiples of them. And so that's what that does. On the bottom row, it's a lost card, which we don't want to do that, whenever we can. It says move 5, all enemies adjacent to any hex you enter during this movement suffer 1. Obviously, that's a huge move. And anything that does that sort of like 1 damage can be really handy when you like see a monster across the map or a couple monsters across the map who all have just 1 health left, or maybe they have 2 health and a wound. You could do a little move around and do a couple damage and help really finish off a bunch of monsters. And that's going to create wind and earth for you, which is nice, but often you're not going to really want to do that. So when this is in your kit, you're usually using it for the initiative and then for just a move too. That's what you're usually doing with this. You might do this just so you can go really early and make sure you pull off maybe a big attack with strength in to just kill a monster before they kill you. So that's what I would do with this. And again, this is probably going to come out as soon as we have better cards. Rising Momentum. This is 25 initiative, and this is an interesting card that I don't think is bad, but might probably be maybe my third removal from the level as you level up, because it doesn't necessarily do so much special. On top, it's attack 3, which isn't bad, but it's not great. It says attack +1 for each pair of active infusion. So if you are planning to get out both of those infusions, probably the attack and the strengthen one, this suddenly becomes an attack 4, which is not bad at all. It's good, but you have other cards that also do attack 4 that don't require the active infusions. So it's not particularly great on top. And it's very similar on the bottom of move 3, and then it's move +1 for each pair of active infusions, which is interesting. The interesting thing about that is that with that 1 infusion, that means you now have turned this into a move 5 with jump, which makes you extremely mobile. So I do like the bottom row for that extreme movement when you need it, more so than the top. Although obviously I won't turn down an attack 4 when it comes up. And then both of them have an interesting effect. On the top row, you can if you want to, you can consume earth to create earth. On the bottom row, you can consume wind to create wind. So it's sort of a way of passing those elements onto the next turn, which is interesting. I think sometimes I'll use this when I kind of randomly created one of those elements, or maybe it got created by someone else, but now it's waning. And so I'll use this to bring it back up to strong, to kind of string it along into the next turn. But I haven't yet found that this is part of necessarily a strategy for, making sure that those elements get to where they're going. I suppose maybe what you could do is if you played something like that one boon of the Tempest, to get wind, and then on the next turn, maybe you use this card to string that wind along to the next turn, and then you take a short rest. You've got Boon of the Tempest back in your hand, and you can now play Boon of the Tempest with that wind. That's kind of what you might be doing with this card. But again, it's not a terrible card, but it's and it gets really solid if you do plan to get 2 infusions active, which I think is what you really should probably aim for. But then again, I still probably going to cut this card eventually. Stoic Vigilance. This is, I think, my first cut. And it's a pretty lackluster card, in my opinion. Very, very, very fast. It's 12 initiative, which is, I think, it's really its only saving grace is the 12 initiative. On top row, you have attack 2, shield 1. Just really nothing special. Maybe it's going to save you a health or 2, and you're going to get a normal attack. That's all that does on top. And then on bottom, it's its weird ability. It's move only 1, which I guess would be move 2 and jump if you have the infusion active. But it's just move 1. Then all enemies within range 3 that target one of your adjacent allies with an attack this round target you with that attack instead, regardless of the attack's range. So I think where you maybe would use this is, I guess, just in a big shielding strategy. If you wanted to use the one card that does give you shield 2, and then you would use the bottom row of this and then really draw a bunch of attacks toward yourself. And again, if you have that other infusion out, then you have Boon of the Tempest infusion out. You now have move 2 with this, which is much better. But it's just really lackluster. And I think you're really going to really want this for the initiative And then maybe if you have some sort of maybe scenario where the objectives, if you have some maybe if you're sort of an escort mission, maybe this could help with either just directing attacks toward you so you aren't losing the scenario objective, or directing them towards you when you're shielded. But I mean, the thing is too, like the other shield card in her kit is the top row of this, and so again, it's a little bit awkward. And this is, I think, my first cut as soon as you have a better card. So, but then that being said, I wouldn't necessarily cut this for the X cards, as we'll see in a moment, just because this initiative 12 is really good. So, let's move forward. Oh, that is all. Yeah, so that is all the level 1 cards. So again, just a quick recap on this. The thing that I think I've kind of come up with is, on the first turn, you're going to want to do a couple of those early cards. It was a couple more earlier. Yes, it was Formless Blade Storm to move, push an enemy, and then create wind. And you're going to use Bounty of the Earth to shield up and create earth. Then on the next turn, you'll use something, maybe Rising Momentum, something like that, to move, but then a card you don't really need. And then on the top row, you're going to do Boon of the Tempest. And maybe you do Boon of the Tempest first if there's an enemy near you, because then you get the attack off immediately, and then you can move away. Or if the enemy is not next to you, you move, and then you attack with this. Because as soon as you play this, you've upped your movement abilities, but also you immediately get that attack. So that'll be your second turn. On the third turn, if you really want to get the second infusion out, I would then go back to Torrential Cleave, using the bottom row to move and create earth. Use the top row of Onyx Shards to disarm and create night. And again, you could go either slow or fast. You have both sides of the coin here. That's now created darkness and earth, I think. Yeah, darkness and earth, which will allow you now to play your other key infusion, which is Caress of the Night, which requires night and another element. And it's going to add wound and muddle to all your melee attacks, and it's going to strengthen you. So you'd want to play this. And on the bottom row of this card is an attack 3, but I don't think you have any other bottom row attacks in your kit, which is where leveling up is going to quickly help you, because I think it's one of the level 2 or level 3 cards will give you a bottom row attack. So if you could, on your fourth turn, play Caress of the Night as your first card, you now have strengthened yourself. This triggers your other infusion to attack for 3 with wound, with muddle, with advantage. And then you use this the other card that I'll show you in a moment to also attack for 3 on the bottom row, and you're also strengthened for that. And so you get 2 attacks off potentially. You don't have to do that. You could instead just use kind of whatever card to move maybe before playing this, so that then this will trigger the strengthen and then attack whoever you're next to. That's kind of like the 4-turn thing. And there's not really anything else you have to do then, but just after your first short rest, you're going to hold on to this combo of Torrential Cleave to move around and create earth, and then either Onyx Shards to disarm and create night, or else, if necessary, Unstoppable Impulse to attack and create night. And now the next turn, you have night and earth, which allows you to pull off Emerald Edge, which requires earth and night for attack 5 and ward. That's really the key. And then once you've got that set up, that's kind of your one of your big swings every go round is going to be the attack 5 and the earth and night. If you could pull off a long rest, you could recover your Spyglass and make sure that your Emerald Edge attack just has advantage every single time you play it. Or maybe you have a Bone Shaper or someone else who has access to Strengthen, who could make sure that this attack is strengthened as well. So that's kind of the big thing that I do in level 1. That's kind of the full strategy. And again, once you have the movement and the jump, you can get around and really put the pain on your enemies. That's what that looks like. Let's look at the X cards. I haven't yet found any of these to be must includes, but there are some fun ones. This first one is imbue with life. It requires earth, and then you summon an animated claymore. So you basically are going to a meditative state, and you are maybe using the force or whatever to to have this your sword detached from you and go and fight. So it has 2 HP, move 3, attack 3, shield 1. And it says whenever you do not have disarm, gain disarm, which is kind of a pain because you're going to stay disarmed, fully through the turn that you lose this. And maybe not until the, you probably want to make sure you lost this maybe on your turn or whatever, before. Yeah, this could be a pain. The fact that you get disarmed and you'll keep gaining it whenever you don't have it. Because again, you're basically focused on this sword floating around and fighting for you. It says this summon is affected by all of your active infusions. And to be clear on this is a rules question that I had before. This means that all of those persistent bonuses apply. So it's going to gain, its attacks will gain wound and muddle if you have that infusion out. But and also again move and extra move 1 and jump if you have that infusion out. But it's not affected by the infusion actions, so it won't get an extra attack 3 or strengthen when you use the infusions. It's just affected by the persistent bonuses of those active infusions, which is in contrast to a later card, which we might get around to looking at. But so yeah, that's how this goes. You're kind of focused on this going around. I had a ton of fun using this because if you notice, it's not a lost card. So that's a nice thing about it, is that even if it gets killed, it goes back into your deck, which is really, really sweet. And they've been doing that for a lot of these Frosthaven summons, which just make them much, much more fun and viable. But that disarming can really slow you down when she's mostly focused on attacking, doesn't have a heck ton of things else that she's doing. And so being disarmed is kind of a pain unless you build a really specific build, I think. And so, which you probably could do, but I did have a lot of fun with this in one scenario where we needed to be in one room fighting these monsters, but then someone had to go and teleport to this other area and then travel over and fight a kind of a mini boss. And so what I did is I left this sword in the room and then left the room, and it kept fighting for me for a while until it died. Or until I even just pulled it off the battlefield, because you can do that. You can just discard it whenever you want to. Once I reached the mini boss and had to fight him there, but it was really fun that it was able to be there and assist the rest of the party. So it is cool situationally. It might be exactly what you need, but I don't think you need to throw this into every time that you're playing this, because really the bottom row it's a lost action on the bottom, and so you're really not using this unless it's specifically for these, probably for the claymore. And so only bring it when you really, really, really plan to use it for a specific purpose. On the bottom row, it's a loss. Heal 7 for yourself, but you can reduce that by 2 to create wind and gain an XP. Reduce it by 2 to create earth and gain an XP. Reduce it by 2 to create night. So if you really need those elements, obviously you could do that. If you need the huge boost of health, you could do that. I think I may have used this card for the bottom row in that same scenario where I used this, just because I did eventually get it back. But just generally, I just avoid her lost cards, because you're typically going to have those 2 infusions out. So you already have a couple lost cards out on the board, and therefore I try to avoid as much as possible her lost cards. She can do plenty else without ever using lost cards, I think. The other X card is Battle Prowess. I don't love this card. It just says grant one of your summons, so like the sword, or yourself, attack 3, and then it carries along the darkness like the other card did in the level 1. And then 78, which is really slow and awkward. And then on the bottom row, it's a lost action, Move 2, you can reduce that by 1 to create an element, get an XP, and loot 2. I feel like I've only been tempted to include this card when we just really, really needed a bunch of loot. And I thought, well, hey, maybe I could bring this, and then like toward the end of the game, I could play this to get an easy XP, an easy element, and loot just a bunch of loot. I still haven't done that, but I'm going to definitely look to include this when there's a scenario where I just expect there to be maybe just a heck ton of little monsters who all drop loot, even if they're summoned, and so therefore I could just swipe up a bunch of loot that way. That's the only reason I would include this, to be honest. The last X card is Crystalline Aegis. And I haven't really considered using this, but I'm sure there's interesting things you could do. It's 17, very fast. It says brittle at range 1 on the top. Add +1 target for each pair of active infusions. And then you gain XP. And then on the bottom row, it says regenerate ward self. That's pretty good. The regenerate ward self could be great. I just feel like I'm pretty tight on spaces, but maybe I would drop the stoic vigilance or whatever and include this instead if I haven't leveled up yet, just because it's you could use it as just a basic card to do a basic move 2 or attack 2, but on the bottom row, if you really need to start recovering health and warding off some attacks, you could do regenerate and ward. And so maybe one of those scenarios where there's sort of like an early combat, and then you're gonna have to maybe travel a little bit and have some space to recover. This might be helpful for that. But then again, it's on the bottom, so maybe you're not being able to move the turn that you used it. And then that top row of brittle, maybe this is great if you can set it up to somehow do this, and then the following turn use Emerald Edge and then double that damage. So I guess it could be really good for that. I'm thinking that that's the way to use this. I'm not expert on using brittle, but I'm thinking that that's how you would use this. So that's Crystalline Aegis. So moving on to the next level cards, there's a couple that come up that are pretty interesting, pretty fast. So I think both the level 2s are quite interesting. The first one is Veil of Protection. It's heal 5 at range 3. And you can reduce that to heal 3 to create Earth and gain an XP. So I do like this. Like, that's a big heal, or you can just make it a very solid heal and create Earth. However, I just don't know. I think that I've gotten into a space where the shielding and the torrential cleave, the movement, are the more reliable ways or it's just very reliable to create Earth early when I really, really want it. And so I'm not sure about the top row there. It is really good. I just think also the other card is quite appealing. And so I think even though this is good, I think you do have that covered. And then on the bottom row, though, this is a really cool infusion. It says Earth and Night. So it's very specific, Earth and Night. But it's very powerful. It says your current and maximum hit point values are increased by 3, which would also apply to your summon if you have the sword. And you are immune to curses. And when this or another infusion is played, perform ward self. That could be great, to get warded and to get immune to curses. So if you're expecting to face like a bunch of curses, this could be a great infusion to use. If you're kind of in a situation where you think that having all that extra HP might be helpful, maybe there's someone else in your party who can like heal you up behind you, and you just want to be able to take a bunch of hits, and you're expecting to get a bunch of hits. The ward could help, the high HP could help. But I don't know. I think I'm usually, when I do take this, I'm usually looking at the top row as a more just very fun situational big heal or solid heal with the creation of Earth. That's Veil of Protection. The next one, though, this is what I'm tempted to really take instead. And usually this is, I think, what I'd recommend to you, depending on your, maybe on your party composition. But this is on the top. It's Remote Impact, 72 initiative. Attack 3, and essentially you leave a blank space between you and then basically 3 adjacent enemy spaces. So it's attack 3, and you can reduce that attack by 1 to gain push 1, create wind, and 1 XP. So I really, really, really like this card for 2 reasons. A, even if you just do attack 2, attacking 1 enemy and creating wind, that's a great way to create wind. When wind is the element that you have the least access to in your level 1 cards, and so having that ability to create wind easily is really, really nice. Additionally, you don't really have any other. I don't think your level 1 cards had any ranged attacks, from what I recall, other than that card that kind of slices through 3 people, I guess. But that's a lost card, so you don't really have any ranged attacks. And so to have the ability to have at least a solid ranged attack, which could also potentially knock out, hit 2 or 3 different enemies, is really, really cool. So I like this. I think that's why I get it, is just for the ranged attack and the ease of getting the wind, is what I would do. And the bottom row is interesting. I haven't yet used it, but it's kind of cool. You consume earth and wind to create a 1 hex obstacle and an empty hex within range 5. And then you immobilize all enemies adjacent to the created obstacle and gain an XP. I feel like this could be helpful in some sort of maybe like a chase scenario where you can kind of throw an obstacle in their way and also immobilize a few people who you really want to slow down. It's nice that it's not lost. I like non-lost cards that create obstacles, but then again, it does consume a couple pretty worthwhile elements, with earth and wind. So I kind of doubt you're using that on the bottom row, except for very situationally. But the top row is just really, 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 really good, and I think this is what I would suggest you use if you're feeling the pinch of not having ranged attacks. Maybe you're playing with someone who has solid access to ranged attacks. Like even the Banner Spear has a really great level 1 ranged attack, and then by like level 4 they've got another really, really great ranged attack that's creating wind. So you might be like, no, they have the ranged attacks covered and they're creating a bunch of wind. I don't need that. I want the healing, so I can heal them up and they can tank for us. That might be what you want to do, but typically I'm starting to lean towards just taking remote impact as my pathway. Now level 3, we have this card, Reinforced Riposte. I think that's how you pronounce that. I don't think it's riposte. I don't know. It's French, whatever. But it's 18 initiative, retaliate 1 at range 2, add +1 retaliate for each pair of active infusions. And then again, it has that carry along the night from, consume it to create it. And it stays out there for the turn. So it's interesting. You could potentially get retaliate 2 at range 2, which is cool. Maybe situationally cool. I don't know where retaliate is best. I tend to think maybe too aggressively to really want retaliate to be my strategy, and also I feel like this character is pretty aggressive, and so if you're trying to really go for a more defensive and retaliatory build, I guess this would be what you'd want to include. And on the bottom, it's interesting. It's move 2. Wound at range 1, move 2, what I think is interesting about this is if you have the 1 infusion that gains extra move, this is now a move 6, I believe, because it'd be move 3. But the wounding is kind of weird just because I also typically prioritize the Caress of the Night infusion, which is going to make all my attacks gain wound. And so I don't know that I would do this. I guess what this card would be, again, would be really, really good if you're just planning not to really attack. Maybe you are playing a summon build. You're summoning the sword, having it do the work for you while you walk around, maybe shielding, getting retaliate, and then doing things like, this move, wound somebody, move away type of deal. So that'd be what that is for. I wouldn't probably take it. I would probably more likely take this card, which is Guide the Flow. I love this kind of card where it's move on top, attack on bottom. I just think that opens up a lot of interesting things, especially if you have strengthen, because then it's an extra attack, which we do. So this is move 3 on the top, attack 3 on the bottom, and it's 35, so like decently fast, or not too slow, but not really fast. And it has this whole thing where basically you can consume different elements to create different elements. So on the top, it's consume wind to create night, consume earth to create wind, consume night to create earth, and that gains you an XP if you do that last one. And then on the bottom row, it's consume wind to create earth to create night, consume night to create wind, and then the 1 XP. So what I love about this is that, again, having a top row move and a bottom row attack is just really, really handy, especially for someone who's often, doing something like an infusion, which takes up a whole top or bottom row action. And so you can either capitalize on it or at least do the things you need to do with this kind of flipped card. But also the consuming elements to then create something else can be really handy. I mean, it's pretty situational, but like at the very least, there might be all 3 of those elements active, and you just didn't get a chance to use them, and you can consume them and create them. Maybe just literally all 3 of them, and now pass them along to the next turn to be able to do something else. I've definitely had done that before. Other than that, it's usually just situationally like, yeah, this night is going away. I'm going to create earth, and maybe I'll be able to, keep that around or utilize it. And so I prefer guide the flow. So I would take remote impact as my level 2, and then guide the flow as my level 3. And again, replacing stoic vigilance and then probably the what is it, the flurry of blades, whatever it's called. I'll scroll back up. The one that is attack 2 at all adjacent enemies. So I would replace probably stoic vigilance and then slashing cyclone. Yeah, so these 2 cards, which again weren't really helping you in your strategy. This one has that kind of lame lost on the bottom and pretty lame top, unless there's a bunch of enemies. And then stoic vigilance was just kind of lame all around, unless you're playing to do like a shielding type of build. And so I would replace those 2 with the remote impact and with the guide the flow. But Veil of Protection is cool. I do like it a lot. I don't particularly like reinforced riposte, so I would take those 2 as my level 2 and level 3 cards. So moving forward from here, I don't have yet a level 4 infuser, so this is a little bit more. I'm just going to read through these cards and give my thoughts on what I would choose. But so far, I just think, it's pretty common that by the time you get this kind of character, you are probably going to start off at least level 2, maybe level 3, depending on your prosperity. And if you start off at level 2, you'll very quickly get to level 3. So these are the 2 cards I would suggest if you're going to go for that kind of attack heavy build, which kind of like, why wouldn't you? I just think that this is what this character's particularly good at, and so that's what I typically am going to go for, and that's what I would suggest to you. So moving forward though to the level, I'm just going to more quickly run through these cards to share what they are and maybe give a sense of what I would do. This first one is Coalescing Darkness. It's an infusion, uses wind and night. After an adjacent enemy attacks you, that enemy gains curse. So if you're expecting to get attacked a lot, you're going to be cursing a bunch of enemies if you can get this out. When this infusion or another infusion is played, perform disarm at someone at range 1. Pretty solid. I mean, they do have to be at range 1, which is, not always going to be the case, but disarm is super great and curse is great. So that's a pretty awesome infusion if it works for your strategy. And on the bottom row, it says push to 2 targets at range 3 and muddle them. You can reduce the target to just 1 to create night. You can reduce the move by the push and the range to create wind. So that's interesting. You can create 2 elements, which is actually pretty uncommon for this character. So creating both wind and night in one action could be really cool. It's really slow, 85. I don't know. I think I would mostly take this if you really, really wanted to build into that style of infusion. So let's move on to the other 4 and see if this is worthwhile. Desperate Throws. Attack 5. Love that. Target 1 enemy within 4 hexes. You can reduce that attack by 1 to create earth. then you disarm self. So you're kind of throwing away your weapon. 16 initiative. And then it says move 2, loot 1 on the bottom. Move any waning element to the strong column. So I kind of prefer this over the Coalescing Darkness, just because I love that fast initiative. I love the fact that you could turn this into sort of just like a desperate attack that might create earth, and yes, it would disarm yourself, but like maybe the next turn you're playing some sort of maybe you're using the top row action of the disarm card that you have instead of an attack, and so the disarm doesn't necessarily matter to you because you can still disarm a target. It's not an attack. So that's what I would say is this could be great if you're planning to use I'm forgetting the name of that card, but whatever that level 1 card is that disarms someone on the top, that could be great. And the bottom is not bad to move, and she doesn't have, I think, any other loot cards in her level 1 cards. I think she has that level X card. But having a little bit of loot action could be great too. So I think this is what I'll probably be taking at level 4. Level 5, Gemstone Resonance. If I remember correctly, looking at these two, these are both cool cards. This is on top as an infusion. Just requires Earth. Add Regenerate to all your heal abilities, and then you immediately are going to heal to an ally within range 3. And you're going to... interesting. So this is a weird infusion. It does not say that you get to do this. You don't get to heal with it every time that an infusion comes out, unlike those other infusions. Playing this will trigger the other infusions, but other infusions won't trigger this, which is strange. And then also it's heals an ally, not yourself. And the interesting thing though is that this is not it's a persistent, but it's not a lost infusion, so you could get it back. So I think what I liked about this card was the idea of if you could get set up with the attack 3 infusion and the strengthen infusion, then you could play this to heal an ally and give them the regenerate and play it pretty easily because it's just 1 earth, and that's going to trigger a strengthen and an attack 3. So that's what's kind of, I think, cool about it, is you trigger the other infusions, and then before your short rest, you're going to want to discard this so you cycle it back in and can do it again. So I think it's just one of the easiest ways to kind of get those infusion actions again and again, which is uncommon. Like usually you're like only going to get the strengthen once or twice, maybe 3 times. This could really get you that multiple times. So I like it for maybe like a longer scenario where you think you can pull that off. And the bottom row, it says move 2. While this card is in your active area this round, your abilities and attack modifier cards treat it as a pair of active infusions. That's cool. So all those cards that benefit from pairs of active infusions could get another pair. So maybe there's already a pair out there, and which again, in this scenario, in this theory, the idea is that you're typically getting maybe 2 infusions out there, and you're playing this card either as another infusion to trigger, or on the bottom row, you're getting this out there for a turn and having it trigger or bump up those other cards, like that card that was attack 3, but then it gets +1 for every pair of infusions. And to be clear too, the Gemstone Resonance, I'm realizing on the top, it just sticks around for the turn, which is not a bad thing. You're probably not going to need that regenerate more than just 1 turn, but that's how that goes. So I really like this card, but I remember the other 5 being really appealing too. Yeah, Obsidian Spear. This is attack 4. And it's like basically you skip 1 space and you can attack basically 2 people in a row away from you at range 2 and 3. You could reduce it by 1 to add push, create night, and gain an XP. And then on the bottom row, it says you consume Earth and Night, attack 4 at range 3 and stun, and gain an XP. Dang, that's a good card. Really? I think that's really, really good. If you can be, again, get your infusion set up and And then, having that one, I think it was Onyx Shards and Torrential Cleave as just like a regular way to create Earth and Night. And maybe you're having other cards and other perks and such that are more regularly getting you access to Earth and Night. So maybe you're getting both your Emerald Edge happening and this. This could be great. A ranged attack on a bottom row action that stuns somebody. It's really sick. And then the top row, it's like a type of ranged attack that could create night. So gosh, that's really tempting. I think honestly, honestly, the Gemstone Resonance almost feels like it would take more work to pull off to get like the strength and attack and healing of an ally. I think I maybe would want that more in like a 3 or 4 person party where there's more likely allies right around me. Yeah. Whereas I think I might go with Obsidian Spear just because I'm getting access to stun is really, really solid. And also again, those ranged attacks. I guess just in my party right now, I'm kind of feeling the feeling of like, ooh, I could always use some extra ranged attacks. And so yeah, I think I like this card. Although I think that the one infusion. This is a question I'll have to look into. Does the one infusion? Actually, I think I have the card over here to the side. Caress of the Night adds wound and muddle only to your melee attacks, which I guess the top row action does count as a melee attack, so that's cool. But the bottom row is a ranged attack. Interesting. I think I would probably just grab Obsidian Spear. Next one is Propulsive Tailwind. This is Initiative 91. It's an infusion. Consume wind and earth. After each of your attack abilities, perform move 2. When this infusion or another infusion is played, perform push 2 at range 1, immobilize. Interesting. That's so interesting. I don't really get the after your attack abilities perform move 2. That really kind of just feels like you can move a ton because we we're moving and then attacking with just whatever top row action, maybe even just a basic attack. You could then move 2, which is really kind of crazy. And then, but when you play this card, it's going to push somebody and then immobilize them, which could be like clutch in certain instances to really keep them away from you. I don't know. It seems fascinating, but I just don't know that seems worth it. So I don't know. On the bottom row, it says move 4. You can reduce that by 1 to create earth. And then grant one adjacent ally move 3. You can reduce it by 1 to create wind. I love that it can create 2 elements in the one card. I forget if those are the 2 elements that are needed for Obsidian Spear. Nope, of course, it's night and earth. That makes sense. Obsidian, black. But yeah, that's interesting. I think this would only be if you really, really plan to have adjacent allies. Like maybe you're, somehow fighting, going side by side your summon, or you have another character you're going to go right by. This could be interesting as a probably a really easy way to get a lot of movement and create those elements really easily. But I don't know. This doesn't super appeal to me. It kind of surprises me in some ways that it's a level 6 card. And I hope the level 6 card is maybe better than this. Oh yes, Gale Barrage. I do like this card a lot. This is consume. It's not an infusion, but it says consume wind and dark or night. Gosh, I always say dark. Wind and night. Attack 2, 3 targets. Piercing of 2. You may target the same ability multiple times with this ability. And then 1 XP. So I love that this can either be like, I gotta attack a bunch of people and wound them all, or muddle them all, or just attack a bunch of people. You could do that. Maybe attack a bunch of little whatever those like pixies are or whatever, that have like shield 2 but only a couple of HP. That could be really good. But also the fact that you can just double down on one maybe shielded opponent is just really, really great. So I think I take it just for that. And I thought that the bottom row is solid too. Let's see. Bottom row is move 1, add +2 attack to your next attack ability. You can change it to just 1 instead to create wind and get 1 XP. The bottom row probably isn't the best unless you have a multi-attack. But with a multi-attack, it could be awesome. And the move ones sound really pitiful for her, except when you realize, again, Boon of the Tempest is just such a great infusion, and it'll change these move ones into a really, really, dependable move too. And so I don't think that's a bad bottom row. You just probably want to make sure your build includes some solid multi-target attacks that you think you can pull off. So I think I would go with Gale Barrage for sure over the Propulsive Tailwind. And let's see, level 7, Diamondization. Shield 1, add +1 shield for each pair of active infusions, which, as we said before, is probably just going to be a single pair, but could be another pair, or it could be the fake pair from that one card. So shield 2, maybe shield 3, but probably shield 2, ward self, create either earth or night. I mean, that's a lot of shielding, really good warding, or getting ward is great. I feel like, and it's also really fast, 10. I feel like that's like just a great replacement card for the one card that we said was like your first Bounty of the Earth, which was like your first thing to shield up and create Earth. This is a great replacement. It's almost like an upgrade on that card. So I think that this takes that place of Bounty of the Earth. On the bottom row, you have this huge lost card, wound immobilize thing. I struggle to understand when you would do that. But yeah, I guess you could do that and then just like run away from a bunch of monsters and let them die by wounding. I guess would be the strategy there. I think that's what you would do. But I think I would normally be just using it for the top row. And so the bottom row doesn't really much matter. And honestly, I think it's just such a good top row. They almost bounced it off with a really weird bottom row. Super situational. Let's see. Does this one beat it out? Oh, I remember this one being a really hard decision between these two. Because Malachite, if you pronounce it that way, I don't know. Malachite Shockwave is going to be attack 4, stun, and then you have like 2 spaces of next to you that you just don't have to worry about. And then there's 3 different targets it could hit. It's a lost card, but does create Earth and Night. I mean, that could be a wild attack to attack for 4, maybe strengthened, from the one infusion, and you're stunning them and hitting them really, really heavily. You are losing the card, but that's a really amazing attack. So I like that a lot. And on the bottom, it's 68 initiative. On the bottom row, it's move 4, move -1 to create Earth or Night. All adjacent enemies suffer 1 damage. I mean, that's a great card. I do just think probably, I guess it really comes down to our build. As we go through, I think we probably at this point at level 7, we'd have a really strong sense of, hey, do we need a top row, easy access to Earth and Night with a fast initiative, or do we need the bottom row access to Earth and Night with also that little bit of damage, which is not insignificant, but has a pretty weird initiative number of 68. I think we'd know. I think by the time we got there, we'd know which one. But I will say I much prefer the top row lost action of this compared to the diamondization one. So yeah, I think I lean toward the other one just to replace Bounty of the Earth. It's just kind of a clear replacement slot, but this could be really good. I'm sure there's other cards it could replace. Okay, level 8, Untether the Shackles. So this is your other summon. You have just 2 summons. This is the other one. You've just created this sword, and it's just going off by itself. It has 6 HP, move 3, attack 4, Shield 1. This is a Spirit Bound Falchion. I don't know how you pronounce that. Whenever you play an infusion, you may have this summon perform all abilities triggered by that infusion instead of you. And this summon is affected by all your active infusions. So not only does this one not disarm you, but it's also going to, you could have it just have the infusion actions triggered by this card instead of you. And it's still going to, be affected by all of your active infusions. It is a lost card though, so there's that. But that's pretty cool. I mean, I feel like a lot of people are going to want to just build up to this and untether the shackles and have fun with their sword flying around beside them. And then at that point, if you have gotten some of those cards along the way that help you with, allies and such, maybe that's going to all pay off at this point. Or Frosthaven does allow for you to reconfigure your choices for just 10 gold or whatever, I think. So if you really wanted to lean into that kind of build once you got to level 8, you could do that for a very affordable price. On the bottom, it's move 5, jump, create wind or night. That's just, that's sick. The only thing I'd say about that is, seems unnecessary if you have Boon of the Tempest already. But maybe if you aren't planning to play Boon of the Tempest, then maybe this could be a really helpful thing. Maybe you are using the bottom row action for a bit until you decide to deploy the sword, maybe in the mid game, and then go from there. Let's see what it's up against. Swift Pivot. Top row is negate the next attack you would suffer from a melee attack this round, and the attacker suffers 4 damage. That creates wind or earth. And it's 8 initiative, so super fast. And then you have the lost action on the bottom of move, attack 4, and potentially 3 different enemies in this weird kind of pivoting action. And then move 2 again, create wind and earth. That's interesting. The fact that you're attacking potentially 3 different enemies with attack 4, and you have all this movement you're doing with it, that's a really cool lost card on the bottom. Top row, I'm trying to imagine you're negating the next damage you would suffer from a melee attack this round, which will surely happen this round because you're moving so fast. Some monsters will go faster than you, but you're going so fast. And the attacker suffers 4 damage, which could be great. I like this card, especially for all those scenarios where there's someone who just has a lot of shielding or a ton of retaliate or whatever. It's just hard to, they're not attacking you for much, but it's hard to get damage on them. This could be a great solution for that. And then the multi-attack is awesome. The fast initiative is awesome. I like this card, and honestly, I probably would go for this card over the Falchion one, the Untether the Shackles. I would probably go for this one. I had a great time having that sword float around in a couple of those scenarios. I'm not certain that I'd want to, make my whole build around having the sword companion. Could be cool. Could be cool to try out. But I think with my sort of just attacking style, this seems better to me. Seems like it's got a cool attack, and it's got a cool ability that could also kind of tech for some scenarios. Finally, we have number 9, Ancient Rites of Power, which is going to be an infusion that requires wind, earth, and night. But at this point, you have some cards that can really easily get you a lot of those elements. But to get a third element, tough. There is a perk I'll mention in a second that can help you get that third element. But 3 elements, add +1 target to all your melee attack abilities. That's amazing. Or at least in a scenario where you expect to have a couple, within range. And it says when this infusion or another infusion is played, perform Bless Self, which is cool. That's cool. I think you play it for the extra targets when you think you're going to just be able to chop up a bunch of people. 94, which, I mean, it's kind of cool because you go so slow. You're probably going to go past everyone if you want to. And then the bottom row is heal 3 targets at range 3. You can reduce the heal, you can reduce the targets, you can reduce the range. to create all those elements. That's kind of cool too, because what you could do is actually, speaking of that whole strategy, like this could be a great card to play at the right before your first rest, and you have taken some hits. Your allies, you and your friends have taken some hits. You can now heal you and another ally for within range 1 for 2 each, and now you've created all 3 of those elements, and you're going into the next turn with all those elements ready for you to play Ancient Rites of Power. So I think that's how you would play this card if you used it. The 1 extra target to your melee attack abilities is really incredible. But I'm trying to think of what it's like best with. I think it might combo with that 1 level 7 card or whatever it was, or maybe it's earlier than that. The one that said you can apply all all of its targets can be targeted on 1 enemy. It might combo with that to then essentially make that all 4 targets could be the same target. I think it does combo with that, which would be really cool. But yeah, that's a very interesting card. I like it. And what does it go up against? Sky Splitting Strike, which I think this might be what I like better. It's a huge attack. Attack 6, initiative 50, attack 6 on top. You can spend Wind to give it 5 piercing and 1 XP. You can spend Earth. You don't have to do these things. You can spend Earth to get +1 attack and wound. You could spend Night to disarm. And wow. So it's just a straight up an incredible attack. Especially if you have those different elements or any of those elements available to you, you can have a huge attack. And again, if you can set this up with advantage, either through Spyglass or through that strengthening, this could turn into a huge attack. Like it could be it could be like a 16 damage attack if you had the +1 to it, and if you had advantage, got the 2 times, and they had poison, it could be literally 16 damage, which is pretty befitting of a level 9 card, I guess. But yeah, that could be an amazing attack. And the bottom row, it says create 1 3-hex obstacle in empty hexes within range 4. Create 1 3-hex obstacle in empty hexes within range 4. Oh, it's a 3-hex obstacle in empty hexes within. I get it. So it's a huge obstacle that you're creating with a lost card. All enemies adjacent to the created obstacle suffer 4 damage and gain stun. And then you create all of those elements: wind, earth, night. It's sad that it's lost. Obviously, it makes sense why it's lost. But it's a little sad it's lost because you can't follow up with the top action. But I mean, a 3-hex obstacle could have a bunch of people around it. You could very easily hit, probably 3 or 4 targets with that, I would think, if they're just in the general vicinity. And that could also deal, 12, 16 damage just automatically without having to do it times 2. Obviously, you'd lose this card, but you could do a ton of damage and stun them all, and then follow up by coming in and just cleaning up, So that's sweet. And compared to the other card, it's tough. I think, again, just from the way I've been building this out, I think I would end up still going with Sky Splitting Strike. I think what would be cool for Ancient Rites of Power is to maybe build some sort of build that that aims to do 4 different infusions over the course of the game, and then does like a bunch of crazy stuff with all that. I think that could be cool. But I think I gotta go with Sky Splitting Strike. So that's me going through in my build. And obviously, hopefully you enjoyed seeing the cards for this character. One major thing to add here is just that there is a perk. Let me see if I don't have this right by me. Oh, I'll just pull it up. I'm not going to go into a whole strategy of what perks you should do. I think there's a lot of just kind of personal choice on how you might want to do those, or maybe you can just really unlock how you should go about it. A bunch of the perks have to do with taking like minimally better cards, but they create elements. And so, I mean, I like that just to have more kind of easy flow of elements. It's nice when there's like an element comes out from an attack and you're like, oh, okay, cool. If I can just create this other element now, then maybe with the bottom row action, now I have the two elements to do a more powerful something else the next turn. But there is one perk that I think is just really, really great. It only takes one check mark. And I just think for me, I got this really early because it just seemed so helpful. But it's called Radiant Boon. And it says this is an ability. This is one of the things in Frosthaven. It's not just a change to your deck. Instead, it's a card that you get. It's a one-time use card every scenario. It says once each scenario during ordering of initiative, after all ability cards have been revealed, create an element. And so my understanding is that since that's happening during ordering of initiative, it's not happening on your turn, and so therefore you could use that element that turn. And so that really is a smoothing out of things. When I first got it, I used it to kind of just like early on get Boon of the Tempest out, and then I realized, oh no, there's ways I can reliably get the both of my kind of key infusions on the board, even within the first, before the first rest, without having to use any lost cards and without having to use Radiant Boon. So once I've started doing that, now I can just really use it during the scenario when it comes up where I'm able to create maybe Earth or I can create Night, and then I can pull out Emerald Edge and I can, use Radiant Boon to create the other element that I need and pull off that, that big attack card right when I need it. And so that is kind of the thinking, especially since the strength, the infusion that gives strength in, when you're doing things like that, it's so unlikely that you're also creating a bunch of elements for a big follow-up attack on the next turn. And so by being able to maybe randomly get an element from a friend or from a monster or from an attack when you do that infusion, and then you could use the Radiant Boon to get the other element that you need to then pull off, a double element card that's going to do a big, maybe strengthened attack. So I really suggest getting that. I just think it's one of those like kind of no-brainer perks to get as early as possible. And so that's my guide so far. Again, I'm no expert. I'm not Mandatory Quests. I'm very inspired by all the work that they do. But I just wanted to get this out there because I really, really enjoyed this. And I was a little stumped at the beginning. And it wasn't until just sitting down and literally looking through and seeing, okay, here are the cards that create these different elements. Here are where they do it on top row or bottom row. Here's a kind of action that it's associated with. And then here's whether they're lost or not. And from there I found those few cards that I mentioned earlier in the video that do reliably without having to be attached necessarily to it, like a targeted thing, or like an adjacent targeted thing, can reliably create those elements without being lost, and can set up for the infusions that you need. And so once I had that, I was just like, I gotta share this because I think once people know how they can use those level 1 cards to do that without using lost cards, they're going to feel so much better going into their next turns with their infusions set up, but with the rest of their cards ready to go and ready to benefit from them. So so that's what I got for you. Hope you enjoy this. Thanks for watching.